Welcome to Time Monk Radio. I'm Gemini, and Susan Wee joins me to discuss digestion. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio. We're going to wrap up the digestion segment this evening.
Yes, our 2-month foray into digestion from start to finish. Thank you all so much for being with me on this long journey. I hope that you, like I, have found it fascinating. And we certainly need to talk about a few things here, shall we say, at the very end. And those would include things such as hemorrhoids. And to go back a bit, to something that we didn't have enough time to talk about when we were talking about the small intestine. So let's return first to the small intestine. And we remember that as we completed digestion, the breaking down of the food, we picked up on assimilation. And that is bringing the specific substances of the food into the bloodstream and taking them thence to the individual cells of the body. So let's imagine, if we can, that we are very good gardeners or farmers, and we have grown a lot of beautiful tomatoes. And we've picked our tomatoes, and we have put them in cases, and we have put the tops on those cases, and we've loaded those cases into a truck. And the truck, though, goes out on the highway. Well, this is pretty much where we're at when we move into the bloodstream from the small intestine, right? We've gotten our food into our body, and that food has produced these tomatoes, shall we say, which is the individual nutritive constituents, and now they've been loaded up into boxes and have been taken out of the gut and taken into the bloodstream. And here are these nutrients moving through the bloodstream. But, of course, the tomatoes are not going to help anybody at all until the truck picks an exit, gets off and unloads the boxes of tomatoes, opens the boxes, somebody takes the tomato out of the box. And just so it is with the nutrition from our food. It's not enough just to get it into the bloodstream. It actually has to get to the living cell and get into the cell. Now, cells uptake nutrients as well as a wide variety of other things through things that are called receptor sites. And let's first imagine that a receptor site is like a keyhole. This is a simple idea of a receptor site, and it's a good starting place. So we imagine that a cell needs a nutrient like calcium, and it makes a calcium keyhole on its surface. That's the receptor site. And then when there's calcium in the blood, here comes calcium flowing through the blood. Well, that calcium is the key that fits in that keyhole, and then it can get into the cell. Okay. Hey, that's pretty good. That's a pretty clever way. This way the cell only gets what it needs, and it can protect itself at the same time. Now, I thought about these keys, and I thought about food allergies and a variety of other digestive problems, and I wondered to myself if these keyholes were set for any particular kinds of keys. And I asked myself what the primary food of human beings has been for most of human existence. And I didn't just want, like an answer like buffalo or eggs or even something general, like animals or plants. I really wanted to know what was the nature of the food that all the people before me ate, and of course the word that describes that food is wild. The vast majority of human beings on this planet, for the vast majority of human existence, have eaten wild food.
Yes.
And so it seems to me that the original key is the nutrient as found in the wild food. And I thought about, well, would there be a duplicate key? What would a duplicate key be like? And I thought about, like, say, a bear in a zoo. And we wouldn't want to harm any bears at all, but if the bear in the zoo died, and there was a bear in the woods that had died, and we were looking at these two bears, would we be able to tell them apart? Just by looking at them, would we really be able to tell that there was any difference between these two bears? Well, probably not. And yet, we rebel against that. We say, but there must be some difference between that. And so I'd like to go back to something we were talking about last week, and that is the difference between blood and chi. And that blood is the stuff that we can see and measure, and chi is the energy that we can't see and we can't measure. So let's use these words. We could say that the blood of these two bears is the same, the physical stuff. If you get a scientist in there, the physical stuff would be about the same in the two bears, but the energy, the chi, is different. And we inherently recognize that energy difference between the wild bear and the zoo bear, because the zoo bear is cultivated. It's taken care of. It doesn't have the stress of living out in the wild. It knows where its food is coming from. It's got water, It may be in a limited space. I'm not saying that its life is perfect, but it is certainly taken care of in a way that no wild animal is taken care of. And exactly so with cultivated food, isn't it now? Cultivated food is taken care of. The rows are hoed. The plants are given extra water. If it doesn't rain enough, we cultivate food. That's what it means to cultivate food. It means to take care of those things, in a special way. And there's certainly nothing wrong with cultivating food. I personally eat a lot of cultivated food, some of which I grow myself, some of which local farms in my area grow, and some of which comes from far away. I like rice, brown rice grown by Lundberg Farms in California, and I live in New York. That's more than 3,000 miles away. But whatever that is, it's like a duplicate key. It's not the original key. It's not the wild stuff. It's a duplicate, and it can be a really good duplicate. It can be organic, biodynamic, all the kinds of words we want to fling at it. It can be a really, really good duplicate key. And the fact of the matter is that most of us have lots of duplicate keys, and we use them, and they work just fine. The vast majority of the time, it's really not a problem with duplicate keys. The problem comes in if we lose the original key, and we need another key, and now we have to make a duplicate from the duplicate. And most of us, at one time or another, had to function with a duplicate key made from a duplicate key, and we can all tell each other it doesn't work real well. When we have made a duplicate from a duplicate, it can stick in the lock. It can not turn the lock. It can break off in the lock. And I think of the commercial foods and the great amount of synthetic things that are put into it, all the way from ascorbic acid to food preservatives to food coloring, which are put in the food that most Americans are eating, your standard American diet, which is SAD. And the effects of those things, to me, turn the food into a duplicate made from a duplicate. And my personal belief is that when one of these duplicates made from a duplicate goes to the receptor site and tries to enter, it gets jammed or lodged in that receptor site. And when enough of this happens, we have an allergic reaction or a sensitivity to a food. Mm-hmm. In many instances, people who have told me that they are sensitive to wheat, I take them back to older wheats like spelt or teff, and they seem to do fine with those things. Now, I want to expand this concept, and I want to not think of the receptor sites as keyholes, but I want us to think of the receptor sites as something that we see when we look through a kaleidoscope. And when we look through a kaleidoscope, what we see is a pattern. And that pattern has a strong central focus and repetitions. And when I psychically see receptor sites, this is what they look like. Just like what I would see through a kaleidoscope. And they are vibrating. So let's go back to our keys and keyholes and see how this would work with this image. What we were calling the original key would be a pattern that matches the pattern of the receptor site and is vibrating at exactly the same frequency. So we have brought together that blood and that chi, right? We can now see it. Before we were just dealing with, shall we say, the physical part of it. Now with the vibration of our receptor site, we begin to add that energetic value to it. The duplicate key has the same pattern, but not the same vibration, not the same energy. So it works on the pattern level, but it doesn't work on the energy level. And then the duplicate key made from the duplicate key has neither the pattern nor the vibration completely intact. We went out boating today, and as we were going along, one of the little girls who had said, "Look at that enormous turtle," and it did indeed look like, a turtle from a monster movie. It looked so big. And as we came closer, we said, "Oh, it's just a rock in the shape of a turtle." And as we came yet closer, we saw, no, it wasn't a rock at all. In fact, it was a dented, maybe a water heater or some kind of thing made out of metal. How interesting to see how our perceptions of these changed as we came closer and closer to it. And, of course, because it was out of context and didn't look the way we thought it was supposed to look, it was difficult for us to recognize it. And I think that something very similar goes on in the body when we continually try to nourish it with duplicate keys made from duplicate keys, which don't match the pattern exactly and don't match the vibration exactly either. This is one of the reasons why drinking or nourishing herbal infusions can have such rapid, profound, and marvelous effects. But there's something else that can really help here too, and that is the addition of a small amount of wild food to the daily diet. Remember, if you will, the last time you were in love. Now really remember it. Remember that feeling of being in love, that bubbling spring of love that was in you and in your heart, and how everything your beloved did was just a delight to you, and anyone that your beloved loved, well, you loved them too. I actually think that when our cells receive nutrients from wild foods, they fall in love, and they become bubbling and loving in that same way. And that when we are getting some nutrition, it doesn't have to be all, it can be even as little as a single wild leaf. When we're getting any nutrition from wild food, that this feeling of love spreads through the body, and it causes the cellular receptors to be much more open, literally, to taking in things from the duplicates and from the duplicates made from the duplicates, so that we literally get more food value as well as more chi or more energy value from the food. Most of us live where there are wild plants around. Learn to recognize a few wild plants or perhaps even some wild flowers so that you too can make this part of your daily practice. I love to go outside first thing in the morning and put some wild food into my mouth. I believe that I'm reassuring my body, that I'm telling my body that I understand what real food is, and that real food is going to be coming along. I think I'm telling my body by eating something wild that it can be at peace, that my body does not have to be anxious. And I think I'm allowing every cell in my body to really be in love, to really feel that ecstasy and that joy. Now, some of you may be saying, well, I don't know where she lives, but believe me, I would not eat anything from where I live. I probably would eat anything from where you live, but let me make this just one step easier for you if you're getting some of those mental objections are rising up right about now. And that suggestion is seaweed. Seaweed is wild food, isn't it?
Yes.
Seaweed is not cultivated. Seaweed is still wild. By adding some seaweed to your daily diet, you can add all those benefits that I just mentioned from the wild. Or you can eat wild fish. Yes, there are still wild fish available, and generally they are very clearly marked at your local store. It should say wild on it, not the name of some ocean, Atlantic, Pacific, or so on, but it should say wild. So far as I know, all sardines are wild. All herring is wild, and all anchovies are wild. So whenever we are eating these small fish, which are wonderful sources of omega-3 fatty acids and very low in the food chain, and therefore the least likely to have any kinds of worries about persistent organic pollution including mercury, the little fish are the least likely to have any of these problems. Well, and not only that, we are getting lots of wild in there at the same time.
Now, Susan, in the winter, is that what you depend on, is the seaweed and the fish and things of that nature?
That's certainly something we can, but there are green plants to eat every single day of the year, even in the wintertime.
Okay. I'm thinking like when we have 5 inches of snow on the ground, I'm mentally thinking to myself, what could I go eat that would be wild?
White pine.
Oh, yeah. Make like a cup of tea or something, right?
A cup of tea or just eat some pine needles. There you go.
Lots of vitamin C.
Right. Rose hips.
True. Okay. Very
So,
good.
yeah, we think, oh, there's snow on the ground, and yet there are things that are held up above the ground.
That is true.
And that's what the birds eat, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, and again, this is almost at the level of symbolic. It's not. We're actually doing it. We're actually picking a wild plant. We're actually putting it into our body. There's actual physical consequences. But again, I'm not saying you have to go outside and make a whole meal.
Right.
A rose hip. Okay. A stalk of garlic grass, which is sticking up through the snow.
Okay.
All right, so that we literally taste and get that wild into us.
Get that energy.
That energy. Now, I promised hemorrhoids, or I promised cures for hemorrhoids, so let's do that before we must close our discussion of digestion. And basically what a hemorrhoid is a varicose vein that occurs either inside or outside the anus. And of the veins, of course, the blood is not being pumped through the veins the way it's being pumped through the arteries. So the veins have little gates in them. And so when the blood pumps, it goes up in the vein, and then the gate closes so it can't flow back down. And then the next pump takes it a little more. But, of course, this is a pump that's gone all the way out to the capillaries, and then now it's pumping back up to the capillaries. It's not a very strong pump. And so sometimes the veins can just kind of break down. The little gates give way. The blood pools up. And then we have kind of a sore, achy area. And hemorrhoids can run anywhere from just a little, oh my goodness, there's a little blood on the toilet paper. What's that? It's a bleeding hemorrhoid. To really big things that are horribly painful that people just cannot wait to get surgically removed because they can't imagine that any pain could be greater than what they're sitting at the point. I'm told that hemorrhoidectomy is exquisitely painful surgery, and that it takes a while to get over the pain from it. But I understand that sometimes hemorrhoids can be as painful as well. What can we do at home? We've talked before about an anti-inflammatory diet, and that means getting the pepper out, especially if there's hemorrhoids. Pepper is very inflammatory to hemorrhoids, and so we want to make sure that there's not cayenne or black pepper or any of those other peppers in the diet when we're dealing with hemorrhoids. And even we were talking about ginger and its role in easing flatulence. Sometimes for people with hemorrhoids, even a mild stimulant like ginger can be too much, can really aggravate that. Certainly constipation, as we know, aggravates hemorrhoids. And we talked in our last talk about a great variety of ways that we can help to deal with and counter constipation. So other than that, we can also use powerful astringent herbs, which can actually shrink tissue. The herb that is crowned the queen of shrinking hemorrhoids is witch hazel. And witch hazel is an herbal remedy that you can go right into the store and buy. You can walk right into the drugstore and say, I would like a bottle of witch hazel. As a matter of fact, you can even get a jar of witch hazel pads to be used by people who have hemorrhoids for shrinking the hemorrhoids, and instead of toilet paper, because if it's a very swollen or very tender hemorrhoid, toilet paper can be quite harsh on those tissues. So little soft pads soaked in witch hazel. Witch hazel is a primary astringent. It shrinks that tissue. It stops bleeding. It is a real wonder. But you can even go one better than the witch hazel at the drugstore, and that is that you can buy witch hazel bark. And you can make your own infusion using 2 ounces of witch hazel bark in a quart or 4 ounces in a half a gallon, and brewing that up, letting it steep 8 to 10 hours, and then putting that into a shallow basin and sitting in it. And even in cases of bleeding and very tender hemorrhoids, generally, one sitz bath in actual witch hazel bark will eliminate those hemorrhoids. If they don't totally eliminate it, it certainly will eliminate the pain of it. Oak bark is another herbal astringent frequently used in relieving swelling anywhere in the down there tissues, but especially helpful for those who have hemorrhoids. Midwives prefer comfrey, and they make a comfrey sitz bath for the woman who has created a hemorrhoid by pushing during her delivery, or they use a comfrey poultice on that area. The sitz bath, especially if we're dealing with hemorrhoids, is such a nice and easy way to do it. And again, all of these sitz baths are made by making an infusion first with the dried herb, long steeping, and then straining that and putting it in a shallow container. There are directions for making a sitz bath in my new book, Down There, The Wise Woman Way. And I, of course, have an entire chapter talking about hemorrhoids in Down There. And these are just a few of the hints that I can give you right now about dealing with that, and these will work for 90% of the people who are listening and dealing with this problem. But for those of you who have something beyond that, like an anal fissure or so on, those things are talked about in depth in my new book, Down There. So what have we done? We have done digestion from start to finish. We have looked at the role of aroma and taste. We've talked about chewing, and we've talked about salivary enzymes, which digest carbohydrates. And we've talked about the miracle of swallowing, getting the food down the esophagus and moving it into the stomach, protein digesting enzymes, and what happens with acid reflux. I hope that many, many people listen to that show and start using slippery elm and dandelion and get themselves free of these pills, which are very, very worrisome to me and dire health consequences from taking pills that so many people are now taking that just shut off acid in the stomach. We've learned about the very important players, the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder, and made a distinction between digesting and assimilating our food, and looked at the kinds of things that help in digestion, and then actually followed the nutrition from our gut out into the bloodstream and to the actual cellular receptor, so that we can have an idea that digestion does not end with the bowel movement. It's not like, oh, we start in the mouth and it ends at the bowel movement. No, the really important part about digestion is getting the nutrition out to the cells. And I want to just mention a correspondence course student of mine who had most of her large and small intestine removed due to ulcerative colitis and was left with a ostomy bag. And I encouraged her to start drinking nourishing herbal infusions because she felt that she was getting not getting the nutrition that she needed. And at first she had a very difficult time with them. But as she persisted and took less and less and less, and I encouraged her, I said, if you can't do a cup, do half a cup. If you can't do half a cup, do a quarter of a cup. If you can't do a quarter of a cup, do a tablespoon. If you can't do a tablespoon, do a teaspoon. And that's where she started, with a teaspoonful of the infusion. And she claimed that once she started doing that and then was able to pick up the amount and actually start drinking it by the cup, that nothing that she had experienced had ever nourished her as well, and that she actually felt like it wasn't a problem that she didn't have an intestine. And I reminded her that, yes, the nourishing herbal infusions are literally pre-digested because we're using boiling water and dried herb. Our body doesn't have to do anything. There's no carbohydrate we have to digest. The proteins are in very neat and orderly ways, and all of the nutrition of these nourishing herbal infusions moves out and into our bloodstream very, very rapidly. It does not have to be held in the body for a very long time. So that's what we've done. I hope it's been a benefit to you. Come and visit me at SusanWeed.com. If you have any questions, you might find that there would be some answers there. And as always, I'll be right back here with you next week at Time Monk Radio. This is Susan Weed wishing you green blessings and reminding you that herbal medicine is people's medicine.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
On behalf of Time Monk Radio, be well.